Assalamu alaikum viewers. Today the topic that we are going to present on the next and the new period of English literature that is called Neoclassical Age in English literature. Students, as we know that I have discussed till now Caroline Age as well. Today we are going to present Neoclassical Age. Neoclassical Age in English literature. This period is also known as the Age of Reasons or the Age of Restoration period. It spans from the late 17th century to the early 18th century. It emerged as a reaction of the preceding Elizabethan and Jacobean era, characterized by return to classical ideals and reason. We are going to discuss it now. Student, as we know that we are going, and as I have mentioned it in the slide as well, that its name that is given to the Western movement in the derogative visual arts, theatre, music, and architecture. That transformations from the classical art and culture of ancient Greek and ancient Rome. Basically, why this is called Neoclassical Age? Because they were following the Roman and the Greek written work, their literature, and they were started their literature in their own literature. They were just following the ancient literature. That's why this is called the classical literature. They were following the Rome, Plato, Aristotle, and these people were Roman and ancient Greek. They were following in their literature. So that's why this moment is called Neoclassical moment. The Neoclassical literature was written between, this is the era that I have mentioned in the slides. It starts from basically 1660 to 1785. This is the age Neoclassical or pseudo-classical age, means the artificiality of the writer of this age. What is the artificiality of the writer? Means they were not supposed to write their own emotions or their own feelings. They were just copying the ancient Greek and ancient Roman in their work. So this were a type of artificiality, means they were approaching towards their literature as compared to, instead of to say something or to write something of their own views or their feelings. So here I mentioned that the term new means new, and classical is the day of the Roman and Greek classics. So they were following their literature. That's why it's called Neoclassical literature. There are three stages, means the Neoclassical period has been divided into three stages. Restoration period, that is from 1660 to 1700. Augustan period, that is from 1700 to 1745. And the third era, Age of Johnson, that starts from 1745 to 1785. So the whole period has been divided into three stages. The Neoclassical period, as I have told, they divided into the three periods. So I have mentioned some of the writers that belongs to the Restoration Age. There is their name is Milton, Bunyan, and Dryden were the dominant influences. Means these were the prominent writers of the Restoration Age. Similarly, in Augustan Age, I have mentioned that it was the time of Pope, and was means that the writer were very limited towards, and They were, we can say that they become a conservative type of, they were just limited towards the pop and central, the poetic figure were at that time form. So Richardson's, Fielding, and Smollett were presiding over the that age as well. Age of Johnson. This was dominated and characterized by the mind, and personally, Dr. Samuel Johnson was uh, play a very important role in this age. So these were some writers that I have mentioned that they belongs to the Restoration Age, Augustan Age, and the Johnson Age. Apart from that, other major writers that I'll um, say about them in lecture, that John Dryden, often referred as a father of neoclassicism. Dryden works epitomized the period characteristics, means they were his essay, dramatic voice. He defended the use of rhyme and the importance of the reasons in the writing. Similarly, Alexander Pope, known for his satirical work, Rapapologue, he wrote a Rapapologue as well. And similarly, heroic couplet showcase his wits and critical forces. So, Jonathan Swift was one of the greatest satirical uh, poet, writer. Gulliver's Travel, he wrote and criticized. In this Gulliver's Travel, he criticized the human nature, politics, and society throughout imaginative and allegorical storytelling. So these were the writer. Similarly, in the Johnson era, Joseph Addison's, Richard Steele, they were the best writer, and their work kept their name in forefront of English literature. Now we are going to discuss the characteristics of the new classical literature. That what are the characteristics means, what the writer basically wants to convey the message, and what they have been followed in their own literature. So imitation and nature. Imitation means they were copying of the Plato and copying of the Aristotle, Greek and Roman. Now you will think about that the nature should be the clouds and these airy and rainy days and these type. No, they were not following these type of nature that we have. They were following in this era, the writer were basically they were following the human nature, the conflicts between the person versus person, the conflicts between the person versus others, the satire. Basically, in this era, most of the writer wrote satire in their work. They shows so imitation of classical models, especially Homer and Virgil. They were just copying their work in the literature. And nature means states, political and social, and they were describing the human nature in that way. Now I'm going the characteristics of this age one by one. Influence of materialism. So in their work we found the influence of materialism, means they shown in their work the people are very materialistic at that time, and they were uh, uh, mm, so they were limited uh, towards the materialism. Imitation of classics, as I have mentioned and I have told you, that they were basically following the old ages, the Roman and Greek work. So they were limited towards their work, means they were not giving to say something or to present their own feelings, romanticism, their own thoughts. Means they were just copying. Why they were copying? Let me tell you one thing more. Because they were after the Civil War, as we have know and we have the history that Neoclassical Age basically followed Civil War and Puritan interregnum. So the restoration of the monarchy under Charles II marked the beginning of this literary era, which was later solidified during the Queen Anne under the Queen Anne. So basically they were this is where the imitation of classical modern writers of this era sought inspiration from Greek and Roman literary work, particularly the work of the authors like Horace and Aristotle's Plato. They emulated classical styles and structure in their own compositions. Concept of nature, as I have told, and concept of man. So they were copying the man nature, the man small thoughts means I'll simple say dates satire were there, as we have the biggest example in this era, Gulliver's Travel, when the people were mentally be too small, so they will think. So the writer basically in this era uh, showed the people's minor minded and their political minded and the nature, basically the nature that how the um, people of that time basically they criticize rationalism. Rationalism they described very well, and scholarly illusion means that the writer were not wrote something like subjective that the every person when uh, read or to saw the literary thing, so they will start by their own. They were limited, objectivity was there, means that scholars were the writers were basically telling or thought in their literary work a lesson or a means morality were their dictatic lecture. So the new classical writer often aimed to educate and morally instruct their readers. So basically the scholars were like that. Works of fiction and non-fiction often carried moral lessons and served as a guides for proper behavior in society. Restoration of drama. uh, the new classical age witnessed the revival of drama, means they revived drama, as we have I have told you in the previous lecture, Civil War for interregnum period, that there were theater were closed. In Puritan age, theater were closed. So in this age basically they revived the drama of Elizabethan age. We have particularly restoration comedy, which focused on the witty dialogues and complex flawed twist, satirical portraits of society upper classes. So all of these are found in the literary work. Classical rules. Now let me tell you the classical rule means they will have to follow the order and the reasons. For example, if the sonnet is 14 lines, so they'll have to write sonnet in 14 lines. The rhyme and the rhythm of the poem. So in this era, basically they were following the orders and reasons of the old poets. New classical literature emphasized reason, logic, and intellectual over emotions and imagination. The writer were basically aimed to instruct their readers throughout rational argumentations. So they were following the rules of the ancient and Rome very strictly in their work. So these were basically the classic rules that they were uh, copying. Heroic couplet. Heroic couplet. New classical poetry was characterized by the use of the heroic couplet, a verse form consisting of rhymed pair of iambic pentameter lines. This structure and balance formed allowed writer to convey their ideas concisely and elegantly. So there have to follow the heroic couplet. Satire and social characteristic. The new classic age writer, basically, as we have noticed, that writers like Jonathan Swift and Alexander Pope use satire to more criticize socially and politically corruption, human folly. So, throughout their satirical work, they aim to bring about positive social change. Objectivity were there, means the writers aimed to convey their own message, what they thinking about the society, about the men. So they were just conveying their own thinking. So new classic literature emphasized with uh, both prose and poetry. Writer employed um, cleverly wordplay and refined expression to create work art that showcased their intellectual and aesthetic sensibility as well. So the objectivity were there in their work, and from the whole era, we got the main point that the writer were basically they were limited towards the ancient Greek, and here we can say that they were copying their work because they came after the Puritan age. So in Puritan age we have a little bit missing some literature. So in summary and in the conclusion of the whole era, the new classical age in English literature was marked by a desire for order, reason, and return to classical ideal. Writers of this era sought inspiration from ancient Greek models, embraced satire to criticize social issues, and focus on wit and elegance in their literary work. The historical background of political restoration and social information play a significant role in shaping the literary landscape of these periods. Hopefully you will enjoy it and you will get some information from this whole video. Still, if you have any suggestion or any questions related to this era or this lecture, so write it in comment and keep watching the videos